Hello, and welcome back to The Security Strategist. My name is Chris Steffen, and I will be your host for today's podcast. I'm the Research Director, Vice President of Research, whatever my title is today, with Enterprise Management Associates, an analyst firm that examines how companies manage their IT infrastructure from the data center to the user environment and into the cloud. And I focus primarily on information security and all things security and compliance. Today, I am excited to welcome Kyle Falkenhagen, CPO, Chief Product Officer with Secureworks, to discuss what this thing called the R is, an XDR, and how we can cut through some of the noise. So I don't want to take a lot of time with an introduction, but Kyle, why don't you give me a little bit of background on your half and talk to me a little bit about Secureworks, and then we'll dive right into it.
Absolutely. So thanks, Chris. So my name's Kyle Falkenhagen. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Secureworks. I've been here for about 7 years, helping really guide a transformation from being a pure security services vendor to much more of a technology-focused vendor, and primarily have been focused on building up our Taegis platform, which is our XDR platform that we provide to customers, to MSSP partners, so that they can deliver their own services on top of it. And in addition to all of that, we also deliver our own MDR services to customers and have a range of other both proactive and reactive services that we can help organizations with when it comes to improving their cybersecurity posture, as well as detecting and responding to security threats.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that. When you go to a conference, so just recently I attended the Black Hat and DEF CON conferences, and as you know as well as I do, when you go to these conferences, it's, you know, you always have the buzzword bingo. And one of the things that people always are talking about is the different blank DRs, from XDR to MDR to NDR to EDR to elemental PDR. They're literally talking about some kind of DR. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the R. We do the D pretty well. I think that in general, between logging and understanding environment, so on and so forth, the D in detection is relatively understood, regardless of whatever the other letter is. But the R is something that we always kind of, it's seemingly like an afterthought. So talk to me a little bit about what the role of the response is in XDR and why it is often underserved in the current strategy and a lot of current products.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to go back and think about where the acronyms came from. So on the technology side, you had SIM products. On the services side, you had MSSPs that were delivering services. And you're right, those were very focused on detection outcomes and identifying the signal and the noise, and then escalating that or bringing that to the attention of an analyst. Everyone realized that that wasn't sufficient. Like, okay, you've detected it, great. Now what do? We need to investigate it, we need to contain it, we need to remediate it, and we need to recover. And so I think you saw the market get ahead of that desire with some of the naming. So whether it's XDR, MDR, NDR, EDR, like you said, this shift in capabilities to be able to go after the next stages once you've detected something. The reality is, I think a lot of vendors really haven't moved the needle in a material way. We talk a lot about the little r versus the big R. And so by little r, which is what a lot of vendors still have, it's very basic containment actions. So I'm going to isolate a host, maybe I'm going to force a password reset, very simple things. And it doesn't really go beyond that initial containment. So everything beyond that is really still a human-led set of activities, and somebody needs to do them. We spend a lot of time focused on the big R, and many vendors are starting to get there as well, where you think about response much more holistically. So, containment is really just the first action that you're taking. You're then doing remediation activities. You're ensuring that you've mitigated the threat so that it can't propagate or get back into the environment, and all the way through recovery in many cases, where you may need to re-image machines or go through your disaster recovery and backup plans to get back up and running. And so for customers looking to take advantage or looking for a partner to help them with that, it's very important that they kind of interrogate the vendors on, okay, well, what do you mean by R? Are you talking little r or are you talking big R? Because everybody has to solve big R one way or another. And so you should know what you're getting from the vendors and partners that you're choosing to work with.
Yeah, let me stop you there because I couldn't agree more. When you even go like on the show floor to any of these conferences, it is noise, 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 noise. People basically saying that we are going to solve world hunger with our 3-letter acronym. And a lot of times, it's scary because you aren't really getting a solution that is going to solve your problem. A lot of times it could be literally just be vaporware. You're getting something that, is I'll be polite and call it, instead of calling it BS, we'll call it aspirational features, right?
Right.
And the reality of it is that you don't have the time, you don't have the energy, and you don't have the money to be spending on things that are not going to do. So then talk to me a little bit about how those users can actually navigate this landscape. I mean, there is a ton of acronyms out there and security solutions. What advice would you give to somebody trying to cut through all the nonsense?
Yep. So I think it's important. So if you think about the definition of XDR, the promise of XDR, it's really around being able to do that comprehensive detection and response with a unified experience and set of workflows, regardless of whether it's network technology or endpoint technology. It's bringing all of that together into a single place to deliver a set of security outcomes. And so I think one of the first things that you can do is ensure that the technology or the partner that you're looking at supports the technology that you already have in place. So you've probably made lots of investments in different security controls across your landscape. And so you want the product that you're going to be working with to be able to ingest that data, make sense of that data, and then be able to use those security controls to enforce containment actions. So the XDR platform orchestrates the controls many times are the things that actually implement the change.
And let me re-emphasize that because it's something that is absolutely critical, and I don't want people leaving this podcast without remembering this part right now. You're not starting in a green field. You already have infrastructure in place, even if it's minor, small little things. And when you go through a proof of concept, when you are trying to determine what solutions you're going to do or use, please make certain that those solutions integrate seamlessly with whatever you're trying to buy. If it doesn't, guess what? Go look at something else because there are plenty of solutions out there and plenty of vendors that are willing to help you integrate with your existing solutions. I wanted to make certain that we emphasize that because it's critically important, and I think we lose sight of it too often.
I do too. And one of the areas that we see it play out kind of the worst is a lot of the endpoint vendors moving into MDR services. So they refer to their services as managed detection and response, and they position them as being sufficient and comprehensive. But 9 times out of 10, those services are really focused just on the endpoint telemetry coming from their endpoint technology. And while endpoint telemetry is key and it's critical to an MDR service, it's not sufficient. You've got email-based attacks, business email compromise, you've got identity-based attacks, you've got things that can really only be seen on the network. And if you can't bring all that together into kind of a single place where you can do detection and response and be able to monitor it holistically and respond to it, then you're really only solving a small piece of the problem that you have as an organization.
Yeah, not all these solutions are created equal. And that's, I mean, unfortunately, that isn't a diss on any one solution or another, but all have their core strengths and their core capabilities.
Yeah.
I guess at the end of the day, the takeaway from that is, one, to make certain that you can use the stuff that you're already using, integrate with what you're already using, and to make certain that the solution that you're looking for, again, being that they're not all created equal, addresses the things that are particularly relevant to you. Plus, keep in mind that you're going to have the solution for a long time, 3, 5, maybe even longer years. Make certain that your ability to grow with that solution is there as well. I think those are things that we forget sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. The flex and grow with you as your strategy changes. We've had so many examples of customers that not only mature over time, but their strategies may change in terms
Absolutely.
of, I want to do the SOC in-house myself. Okay, I'm struggling to hire and retain talent. So let's change our strategy. Let's go with more of an outsource-based approach or a co-managed type model. And you want a technology and a platform that can support you as those changes occur. So you're not constantly ripping and replacing and going through these huge projects every few years as your strategy changes.
Well, and security is constantly changing too. I
Yeah,
mean, there
absolutely. Yeah.
isn't such a thing as, a static security realm. It doesn't exist, right? I mean, I've been doing this for the better part of 25 years now, and the changes between when I started compared to now, I mean, we're not even talking apples and apples anymore. So understand, I mean, maybe your XDR solution doesn't last that long, but understand that your company is going to change, and you need a solution that has the ability to change as the technology changes, but also as your organization changes.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about, and we're shifting a little bit, talk to me a little bit about the differences between offensive and defensive security. Why is that important when you're taking and considering how your organization shifts their focus towards kind of like a risk reduction model to cyber resilience to cyber maturity? It is something that, people are now talking more and more about. You don't want to be on the defensive all the time. There are reasons that being proactive, heaven forbid proactive, makes a lot of sense. Talk to me a little bit about what those differences are.
Yeah, I think you can think of it a little bit like a pendulum. And I'd say over the last few years, the pendulum has definitely gone more towards the detection and response. And as you called out, we're definitely starting to see that pendulum go back towards more of proactive risk reduction, offensive based approaches to try to get ahead of the threat. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that most threats today are still opportunistic. And so things like scan and exploit activity. So steps that you can take that improve your posture can have massive returns in terms of whether you actually suffer a breach or not. And so it makes sense to invest the resources and the time to improve your kind of standard posture and reduce your risk, because that can really help out with whether you get attacked or whether it's the guy down the street that gets attacked. Because again, these attackers, most of the time, purely opportunistic. They're not targeting you as an individual company. Obviously that happens in some cases, but it's much more opportunistic. They want to make money, and most of it's, related to cyber criminal activity, and they're in it for the money. They're going to do what's easy. And so if you can make it just a little bit harder to get into your environment than the next guy, you're going to be in a better position. And so I think you see a lot of focus now on this broader theme of exposure management, which is kind of a natural evolution to vulnerability management. But you've got vulnerability management, you have attack surface management, you've got digital risk, where you're kind of looking out in the web, in the dark web, and seeing where you may have different exposures, continuous threat exposure programs. Like all of these things, spending time on them has a significant return on investment. And again, I think it's a little bit the pendulum. Everybody has been so focused on detection and response that some of these other areas have suffered, and we're starting to see it come back now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And there's the old joke that if there's three of you in a pasture with a great big bull, you don't need to be the fastest. You just need to be faster than the slowest guy, right?
Exactly.
And so in this particular case, I always talk about cybersecurity maturity, right? And so nobody's 100%. Okay. I mean, even the greatest security organizations in the world are not at 100%. They want to be 100%. They're striving to be 100%. But the goal is to be better than the next guy and better and continuing trying to be better. And so you may start at a very low spot, but even the smallest improvement increases your security maturity just that little bit. And so even if you're improving incrementally, and that incremental improvement comes over, days, weeks, months, years, that's probably better than the next guy. And that's something to be applauded. That's something that's important. And I think that we need to continually remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing that goes back to the last thing we talked about, which is as you evaluate different technologies and potential partners and vendors, is asking them questions about how they can help you improve your posture. Because the reality is that attacks, they don't happen all the time, right? So there's a lot of downtime in between potential attacks. And so what can you be doing during that downtime to, again, get ahead of it, get more offensive, and improve your overall resilience?
Well, and make certain that they want to partner with you, right? I mean, they're there to help you. Of course, they want to sell whatever they're selling, but the reality of it is that if they're not willing to be your security partner and they're just your security vendor, go look for somebody else. You want somebody that is willing to take and walk you through the next steps of increasing your maturity, so on and so forth. And trust me, I talk with all these guys. a lot of them are willing to do that. The ones that aren't, again, go find the next one, because there's plenty of them out there that are willing to be that partner. So when you talk about some of the next things in cybersecurity, one of the things that I find very interesting, and don't take my word for it, take and look it up on the internet, but when you go to these conferences, you'll see that one of the trends for 2024 is finally people are understanding that identity is one of these critical points in cybersecurity, and maybe we need to be paying more attention to it. Talk to me a little bit about identity, what the implications are for security posture and risk management, how you take and look at it. We've been talking about identity for forever, but why is this now kind of starting to become the next thing?
Yeah. So I think a few reasons. One, if you look at breaches, like we did a report earlier this year, if you look at last year, pretty much 80% of all breaches have an identity component. It may not have been the initial access vector, but it's definitely associated with things like privilege escalation or lateral movement that helped increase the scope and potential impact of a breach. If you think about it from an initial access point, we're now seeing that about 33% of all attacks are starting with some sort of account compromise. And so I think you have this increased threat prevalence that's happening with identity being kind of the entry point or a big component of the attack. Additionally, I think you see some macro trends. So I always like to equate it to what endpoint did to the network. So if you think about the critical control point 15, 20 years ago, it was the network, right? Well, let's build a perimeter, let's lock it down, let's not let anybody in. Then as you started to have hybrid cloud environments, the kind of traditional network boundaries started to dissolve a little bit. The endpoint became the critical control point. And I now think we're at a point where with things like bring your own device, work from home, mobile, SaaS applications, continued digital transformations and adoption of public cloud, I think you see identity now becoming that next critical control point. And so with the threat prevalence, with the visibility that you need at the identity and the power that's behind an identity, it needs a lot of focus. And so again, the first area that you can start is on posture. Identity is a complicated thing. You've got people coming into the organization, leaving the organization, their roles are changing. So there's a lot of change within the identity infrastructure. And while there are products that are focused on managing that change, there hasn't been a lot of focus on securing that environment. So I think that's what you're starting to see now, this concept of identity threat detection and response. That's everything from let's help lock down our identity environment and make it as resilient as we can, to detecting common types of identity-based threats, all the way through, again, response. And not just basic responses, but much more advanced potential multi-step type responses that deal with identity.
Yeah, we're actually doing ITDR research right now because, again, it is something that is particularly interesting to me. I'm glad that you brought it up. It's something that really is kind of something that we need to be paying more attention to. And I'll argue, too, that as much as we talk about the user identity, don't forget about devices. Don't forget about your networks. Don't forget about those things. Those are all part of the identity conversation that I think sometimes we focus on the person, and we need to, obviously, but don't forget these other things as well.
That's a great call out. And as you get more Internet of Things, more devices online, that's a lot more machine accounts that and service accounts. And so many of the threats or threat actor behavior really exploits those identities.
Yeah. I have one last question for you, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Talk to me a little bit about how organizations can balance their proactive security measures with traditional detection and response. And what should they really be expecting from the security providers to enhance their overall security posture? What is a fair expectation that they should be getting from their security partners when it's all said and done?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the strategy that the organization has. I think, typically you've got vendors from a technology perspective that focus on detection and response, and you're going to have vendors that are more focused on the proactive side of things, the exposure management side of things. And then you're going to have providers that are delivering more of the managed services. And I think at the MDR level, so if you think about the managed services, I think that is the most critical area to bring the two things together. And so making sure that if you are looking for an MDR provider, that they're able to deliver both the reactive detection and response services and capabilities, as well as those proactive capabilities. And ask them questions such as, okay, when you're not doing triage and investigation and response, what are you doing to help me improve my posture? What are the capabilities that you provide? What are the proactive services that you can provide? What are the scans that you're doing to look for misconfigurations and other findings, and make recommendations?
Even getting a copy of their roadmap. Where do you think that this is going, and how are you going to integrate the latest? I'm going to use the word AI. I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. But talk to me about what your roadmap is. Does it include AI? What does that mean to us? What does it mean to how you're doing your scanning? Is your roadmap going to improve my overall security posture?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much to be gained by connecting your threat data with your exposure data in both domains. So if you're in a threat management set of activities, having that exposure data can help you detect better. It can help you triage a lot faster, and it can help you investigate and get to the right response action if you can make those connections automatically. But being able to do that requires having a very deep integration, having a common asset model underneath it. So there is a lot that can be done to do those integrations. And then on the exposure side, by having the real threat data that an activity that's happening across your environment, you can now better prioritize all of those findings. And you can actually go back to, one of the biggest problems is security teams will find all these vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, but then they got to go work with the business units and try to convince them to make those changes and close those gaps. But now being able to show, oh, no, this server had literal scan and exploit activity against it over the last 2 weeks, or your machine is vulnerable to something that we just had scan and exploit activity against in this other part of the network, right? And so it's just a matter of time before your box has that same activity against it and you're vulnerable for it. So you need to go fix this in the next 48 hours. So I think that there's so much value that can be derived from bringing those two things together. And we're in the early innings. So I think, again, like you said, I think roadmap is critically important. And what is the vision that your partners are going to have? Because it is a partnership, right? And you're not just buying what they have today. You're making a commitment. You're buying into their vision of where things are going. And so making sure that the partner that you choose can articulate that clearly and it's aligned with where you see the market going.
Yeah, great way to end the conversation. I couldn't agree with you more. And again, there are plenty of folks out there that want to partner with you. Talk to my friends here at Secureworks. They would be more than happy to partner with you. Kyle, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Really appreciate you coming on. Thanks everybody for listening. Hope you took a lot away from this podcast. Again, go check out Secureworks. They're doing awesome work in this area and would be more than happy to partner with you on improving your security maturity in general. We'll be back here next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all of the major platforms and follow the conversation on socials, EM360 Tech on X and LinkedIn, and head over to EM360 Tech for much more daily great content. I appreciate it, Kyle. Thanks for coming on, and I hope that everybody enjoyed listening to the podcast. Until next time, thanks.
Thank you, Chris.